don't know what, it probably took me like a year to figure out, bring a mouse. A remote mouse.
All right, good evening, everyone. I'd like to officially call to order the meeting of the Manchester Essex Regional School Committee at 6:04 p.m. on November 5th, 2024.
Election day.
And we can start the meeting with public comment. Is anyone online that would like to make any public comment, please put your full name and address in the chat. And while we're waiting for that, is there anyone in person that would like to make any public comment? All right, not seeing anyone. Is there anyone in the chat yet, Maria? Has public comment? We'll wait maybe another, well, not a minute, but 15 seconds. All right. So not seeing any public comment tonight. We'll move on. I do not have a chairman's report tonight. Nothing specific that I'd like to call out, but so next we will move on to our consent agenda. And I'd like to just split up the consent agenda into two votes tonight. One that would include the acceptance of warrants 10-022 to 10-023 and the minutes from our meeting on October 15th, 2024, and then the separate part for a donation from the Friends of Manchester Essex Performing Arts. So could I get a motion?
We're gonna look back to the student report.
Yep. Well, let's do this first and then we'll.
Just looking at the agenda.
Yeah, so we'll loop back.
Okay.
Yeah. So if I could have a quick motion for the warrants and the minutes.
So moved.
Thank you. Second. Thank you. Any discussion? All those in favor? Thank you. And then and then I'd like to okay, and then I'd like a motion to accept the donation of $3,000 from the Friends of Manchester Essex Performing Arts in support of the high school musical.
Moved.
Second. Great. Any discussion?
I had sent a couple of questions, just wondering kind of where this was initiated and is it necessary? What money is already going toward this? So if Pam could maybe explain to us.
I believe it was just a check that was delivered to the middle or the high school in support of the upcoming musical, which was very generous on FOMIFA's part. But I did want to clarify in response to a couple of questions I received that there is money available to support the musical. It comes from 3 separate buckets. So the stipends for the advisors to conduct the musical are embedded in the general fund and the stipends category in the MITA contract. Each school, the middle school and the high school, each have a student activities special projects line. I believe the middle school's line is about $6,500. And the high school's line is about $25,000. So those lines are intended to support everything from field trips to at the high school DECA debate, performing arts. The principals need to manage those accordingly, given the activities of the year. Then we have the third source of funding, the Student Activities Fund, for which the musical currently has $14,900 in that account to support the musical, and I believe they fund the majority of it through any fundraising that they do at the musical and ticket sales. So this would just go to supplement that account and provide support for any investments they need to make to carry off the play this year. We did have a joint meeting, myself, Tyler, Julie, Michelle, just to kind of look at the funds. We have lots of new people trying to do lots of things. And just kind of go over where all the categories were and how we might go about funding it, and ask them to try to generate a budget and look at what all of the expenses are. And as we kind of went through the brainstorming of the line items, it looked like they were in good shape for this year and should be able to replenish for next year. So this is, of course, very generous and just extra support for their investments.
Excellent. Any other questions? Then we will vote. All those in favor? It's unanimous. Thank you. And next we will move on to our student report.
Okay, so my name's Stella. I'm a senior. I'm gonna be doing a student. So, I don't know, trying to fill Diego's shoes. We'll see how it goes. Yeah, so the high school just ended quarter 1 this Friday, and I have 4 kind of main topics that I hear people talking about a lot that I really wanted to bring up. That have like kind of been going on these last 2 months. So the first one actually has to do with the space we're in right now, the Learning Commons. Obviously, there's been some pretty big changes to how the space is used between the end of last year and this year, mostly being that high school students who don't have a teacher in their class are no longer, or were no longer allowed in the beginning of the school year in this space. And that kind of had the effect of, I would say, primarily shifting the space for usage for the middle school rather than what the high school used it for. So in the beginning of the school year, we were told that we were essentially not allowed in this space for the purposes that we've been using it before. And that meant that students who had study halls were sent to either the auditorium or the cafeteria, depending on what time of day it was. So I had a lot of people voicing concerns or voicing frustrations because there's not really a hard surface to work on in the auditorium. If you ever like attended a play there or anything like that, doing homework there is very, very difficult. So people would be on the floor, like using their binders as hard surfaces, which I think caused some frustrations. So then it became, as I understand it, on a case-by-case basis, you were allowed up into the Learning Commons to do work, but that had to be approved before you came in here by Ms. Pira. So I think the effect of this was just that people weren't really sure about the rules regarding the space. And students would kind of get like ping-ponged back and forth between different teachers and administrators. Like sometimes someone would tell you can come up here, and then you come up here and then you get yelled at for being here, and then you'd be sent back, and then you'd be yelled at again to come back up here. So it was just a bit of a confusing experience that I think a lot of people were frustrated on, because it felt like this space, there wasn't really like a clear vision or plan for this space. And I think that's really what students want, is just like a clear idea of what it's going to be used for. And that doesn't necessarily have to be what it was used for. It just has to be a purpose that makes sense. So that is honestly like the biggest thing. Second would be the changes, or I don't know if changes, but the attendance and tardy policy. So as I understand it, after 3 parties, you have a conversation with the dean of students, Mr. Water, and after that, you can either, like, the consequence for having 3 parties kind of varies depending on that conversation. So some students will get detention after 3 tardies, and some students will maybe like receive like a warning after 3 tardies, which I think has created some frustrations because it feels like the same standards aren't really being upheld for everybody. And I understand the purpose of having open discussions with students, but I think that seeing somebody receive different consequences than you are for the same like rule that was broken can be frustrating to see, and also confusing as to what the policy is. Third thing was something that came to my attention after I myself experienced an issue with this, but the bus issues that we've been having recently. So, yeah, I mean, as I'm sure you're all aware, there's been a lot of issues with the buses, general buses, athletic buses, buses for academic programs. I myself was left in Westfield, somewhere out in Massachusetts, Westwood, for I think
Pretty West.
3 to 4 hours without knowing if we were going to be picked up by a bus driver. There's an issue. So I think, I mean, I don't know the feasibility of this, but people have been asking the question of, are we able to lease vans to kind of mitigate the issue of the bus driver shortage? Is there any like solutions that can be taken to this? Because right now it feels like we're just doing a lot of documentation about the problem, but like a statewide bus shortage isn't really an issue that's going to be fixed just by continuing to go down the same path. So that's something that on people's minds recently. And then the last thing is something that I was going to be talked about tonight, but phones in school. I know that a lot of schools around us have been banning phones, like Ipswich High School. And I guess like what students are kind of wondering is what the word like ban actually entails or like means in regards to Manchester High School. Because I would say in the majority of my classes, yeah, actually definitely majority of my classes, teachers already take phones during the class. So you don't have access to your phone in most classes, which I would say makes it so that phones in classes aren't really an issue that's on people's minds, because it feels like we already have most of the infrastructure in place to kind of solve any problem that we've been having. And teachers that really do not want students to be using their phones in classes have already fixed that issue for their classes. So I don't know. I guess that's what I'm curious about in regards to banning phones, is like what the difference is between having every teacher enforce the policy of taking phones away during class versus like an outright all day ban. That's like what I'm kind of curious about, and I think what other students are kind of curious about. But yeah, that's kind of all.
Just that.
Just that. Just that.
Thank you very much. Anyone have any questions or?
I'll just say she and I had a very similar list, so I have 3 of her items on my list. So you can get some of the follow-up about
Yeah.
what we're doing, and she's got good ideas. Michelle has similar ideas. It's
Do you have a time limit or are you able to stay for a bit?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I wasn't sure if you were. And okay. Thank you very much for your report. We appreciate it. Unless anyone has any questions, we can move on.
I'll just tag on to this, which is, we were a little late getting started this year, so we just had our first lunch meeting to actually get organized and check in last week. But we have set the schedule, and I believe we've landed on second Tuesdays. So it's not a decision that has to be made tonight, but the committee is free to handle representation to that any way they want to. Chris, the chair has done it in the past. You could, I don't know how it works with your schedule. You could do a different person at every meeting. You could assign yourself or take a vote or take a volunteer. So maybe between now and the next meeting, we can kind of figure out who wants to be, how you want to be represented in those meetings. So what we tried to do there was just kind of check in and talk about what the schedule would be for the year and start thinking about how we could tackle some of the items and to-dos that we had at the beginning of last year in terms of, well,
What time are those meetings?
typically we start around 12:10, 12:14, and go to about 1. It's like 12:15 to 1:15 is probably. I think sometimes we go a little longer if we're on a topic, because we do 2 shifts of lunch. So just something for the group to consider, and probably just reach out if you're interested, or does that work for you?
That works, yeah. I'm very open to sharing that responsibility. And as well as I can try to look at my schedule to see if that can work for, within my schedule. You said the second, just 1 Tuesday a month? Or
I'm
2?
sorry, the second Wednesday of
Second
every month. So
Wednesday.
it would be the Wednesday in between the 2 school committees meetings. So
Gotcha. Okay,
I can pull all the dates, put them in an email, put it out, and then we can go from there.
sounds like a plan.
They want the voice on.
All right. Next we'll move on to subcommittee reports. First up, we can hit on elementary facilities. So Teresa or John, would you like to report anything out?
Well, the group did meet, but John and I were both incapacitated, so I think we have to defer to Pam for a report, don't we?
I was there, but
Oh,
yeah,
You went anyway?
I went, yeah, we just took,
Here's a trooper.
we took a tour of the elementary school, across the street. And then we sat down and chatted about next steps in the timeline and the process. So overall, it was a good site visit. And I know many of the folks had never seen that school before, so it was good for them to, see the layout, see the program at this, the space, how it's used for the program and the amenities that they have there that hopefully we can incorporate in Essex. So that was really it.
Yeah, we got into the OPM procurement process a little bit. This is a pretty packed meeting. The report will take a long time, so I was thinking our next session, which is right before our end of month building committee meeting, I can kind of run everybody through the basics there. And we have heard back, at the time of our building committee meeting, I had resubmitted to MSBA the new information that we had from Essex about potential expansion of the residential development that would increase students, potentially increase students over time. So they took that information, they took a relook at the enrollment data and some of the demographic trends. And the recommendation back is that we hold at 250, so they're going to be reissuing another letter, which we'll have for the meeting on the 26th, which is going to put us on the board meeting for December and put us right on that timeline we projected for OPM procurement. So where we stand now, we should be onboarding an OPM sometime in March of this year. So we're moving forward. It's exciting.
All right, any questions? Perfect. We can move on to the finance committee. Anna, Jake?
We went over the budget to action report and then highlight some of the things that we shall continue to improve on next quarter. We also talk about the October annual report, or the district agreement. And we should end up putting together a package, distribute it soon. We also talked about, Glenn came in and did a cash update, year-to-date update. And so that was super helpful. We're gonna be doing that every quarter at the finance subcommittee meetings.
Covered it.
Great, any questions for the,
We have the budget to actual report on the formal agenda if anyone has questions about it at that point.
we do? Okay, moving on to the policy subcommittee, Kate, Teresa.
Yeah. So, so we've actually met twice since our last meeting. Took advantage of having that fifth Tuesday, because the way this worked is that in our last committee meeting, we had a first read of the draft reserves policy, got some feedback. Jake had given a couple suggestions. We discussed it here, got feedback about yes, incorporating a target number and moving forward with revisions. When we met as a subcommittee after that, we were discussing that and discussing language, specific language, because there were some things that needed to be tweaked because statute and that sort of thing. Michelle being there was a great help to that because she was really informed on the statute language that we needed to incorporate there. And as we started talking about the tweaks there, we also discussed comparable districts, and in between, Erica also, we didn't finish at that meeting. We knew we were going to meet one more time. We added an additional meeting. And then in the in-between, Erica sent out comparison policies from Hamilton Wenham that had been referenced, and also Masco, where just a new consideration where they separate out E&D and really just target that. So just looking at it in a slightly different way than had been. So then when we got together and met the second time to work through that, I brought forth a third comparable with Triton's E&D policy for us to sort of look at and discuss. So what we are coming to you tonight with is, rather than a second read of the original draft policy, we worked through, because we looked at the different considerations, and the Triton template had, Triton's reserve policy had basically everything that our draft policy has. Like it incorporated all of that information, had some additional helpful language, but it also had a couple other things. One, it had a really clear section for OPEB reserves, which we hadn't even addressed at all in our draft reserve policy. And so we took a closer look at that together as a group, put in the pieces that we already had from the reserve policy work that had already been done, and sort of married that into the template of the Triton document. So what we're asking tonight is a couple different questions. We can move forward with a second read of the draft reserve policy as we originally had. I don't know that that would be, I think that would be a future meeting, but we can move forward with a second read of that. But we also really liked the idea of entertaining this separate template because again, it includes all of the information and adds on to it in a way that's really clear and understandable. So we put in, you'll notice, I know you guys all got this sent to you. We put in the information that we have and highlighted things that are specific to MERSD. A couple of the things that if we do want to move forward with that template, we would be asking of the full committee are directionally, number one, do we still want to keep that? Are we good with that yellow line up at the top that we will strive to maintain reserves of 8%, which we carried from the last at the direction of the full committee? And then also there are a couple other pieces here highlighted in yellow conversation about. The idea here is, again, to take what we had and not recreate the wheel, but put it in a format that incorporates the OPEB conversation, includes the items we already had, but also really clarifies the use, that we're really focused on the use, the language here. So I don't know if anyone's had a chance to look at all of this and take a walk through. But the other thing is that in the Triton template, one thing that comes up kind of frequently is the language is more based on best practices include X, Y, Z. We wanted to make sure that we weren't just taking someone else's word for what best practices are and adopting it as our own policy. So as a subcommittee, Pam agreed to run that by the district's financial planner and the district's auditors to make sure that they were in agreement with what is in here as sound practice. So I don't know if they've come back with anything yet. That was really quick. That was just last week. So that's something that we would want to confirm. But in general, I think that I don't want to speak for everyone on the subcommittee, but it seemed well received as we worked through it. And so it's really up to the full committee to make a decision on the direction that we go here with this. Kate, what did I miss?
And just add that as we were digging into the specifics of the policy that you already did first read on, we realized that our practice currently is not aligned with that policy. So currently we already have more than 8% in our reserves. But we also know that we're forecast to spend almost $2 million in the next 5 years on capital projects. And so whatever policy we adapt needs to be able to account for both of those factors.
Michelle or Pam, do you want to add to what we've explained? You were part of it.
No, I think you're on the money. I think it's like a two-part question. Do we stay on the track we were on, or do we consider moving to this format, which I would agree everyone at the table felt captured everything a little bit cleaner. So depending on the answer to that question, the second question will be then what are the inputs for some of the technical references in here?
We also raised the question of what point in time are we measuring our reserves, right? So if we're looking at the END, are we only referring to the certified END, or are we looking at it at another point during the year? If we're looking at our stabilization fund, are we accounting for what we have in projected costs during just the following fiscal year or 3, 4 fiscal years?
That is our report. So we would ask the full committee to, for a direction on moving forward with, whether you guys would support moving forward with this new template.
All right. So I think the best way to approach this is to make a motion first, and we can discuss. So do I have a motion to switch? So a motion to entertain the new draft created by the policy subcommittee.
So moved.
Second,
Second.
discussion. First of all, does anyone have any clarifying questions, or is it we can just do round robin?
So I've definitely got some questions. So first of all, I think we were so close on the last one. I'd actually like to stay with that one because I think this one raises a bunch of questions. So I could pose the questions if it makes sense. But if everybody's wants to go to the old one, then it's going to me to do all that. But
I thought we're not, well, but we're going to take a vote. So
Right, yeah.
okay. So my question's that first, you mentioned, Teresa, that, there are kind of generic recommendations here. So financial rating agencies currently recommend.
Yeah.
So my first question, which I think you answered, was those are not our agency's recommendations. Those are generic, which I personally don't like in this, particularly when it's referring to local governments, which we are not. So
well, we are a separate entity though.
We are an
And
entity.
it does,
We're
and
not
it
a
does,
local government in terms of what I would assume this is referring to.
we are an entity on par with the local government.
We're,
It raises those questions, right? So
I
that's,
think it acknowledges.
all right. So second, by adding OPEB and the way it's phrased here, keeping our old statement, which I think we're taking one philosophy and merging it with a second philosophy, which may not work here. Right now, by adding OPEB to the reserve list, that 8% includes OPEB.
We would need to clarify that. You're right. Yeah, because it couldn't.
And I think we actually talked about this when we were first working on it. We asked, should we add OPEB? And we said, no, we don't use it for operational capital purposes. So, which is really what this reserve policy is about. So I don't mind including OPEB.
Yeah.
I think it's totally fine, but we have to be very clear what we're doing here.
I would say last year we did start
Right.
to use it for operations.
That's
It's
why
in
that
there
came
as
up.
an operational offset, a reduction of $150,000.
I thought we just didn't contribute quite as much.
Yeah, but it's being counted as, it's helping to offset the assessment by reducing the cost of the budget.
But that's not using the reserves. That's just not committing as much in the new payment or.
So that's part of why, so that's the conversation that we had and are having. I hear what you're saying about clarifying whether OPEB contributes to that 8% or not, and I think that definitely needs to be addressed. But the idea that we are using it as an operational budget offset, I mean, that was part of the budget conversation of, well, we can use some of this to offset that. So I think we need policy about usage of that, because until it's fully funded, we're impacting our future.
So my third question, does this essentially create a floor and a ceiling, which we all kind of did a straw poll and said we weren't going there as a committee? And it essentially creates, if we have the 8% as the target, that essentially becomes the floor, because down below we have maintain at least 3% E&D and strive to maintain 10% in the general stabilization, which if my rough calculations based on this year's budget, that turns out to be 13 or 14% or so as an effective target or a ceiling. So I just wanted to see if that was actually the intent, or is that a kind of an effect of going to this?
I think that what was appealing about this is that it breaks down where whatever target we're going for, whether it's 8% or not, it breaks down what percent of that is where. So it's still not saying a low and a high, it's just saying strive to maintain, say, 3% in E&D, strive to maintain, say, 5% in stabilization.
Then why not phrase it as targets in those two rather than caps in those two?
I don't think
could.
it's freeze, is it?
One is,
So it's
one is
no.
at least and the other is.
No, it says it is recommended
That's
by,
not
and it will be our auditors. It's recommended by our auditors that we maintain at least a 3% E&D balance to protect against unforeseen costs.
But our action item is the next sentence. The district will work toward maintaining an appropriate balance in our E&D, but not over the priorities of establishing and funding stabilization. So the idea is that it doesn't, it gives the latitude there and specifically doesn't. It just gives a comparison of what our financial professionals recommend so that we have something to work from.
And then not to open another can of worms, a much bigger question that Triton's policy adjusts is how they maintain the stabilization fund. So do we have a set amount annually that we want to contribute to the stabilization fund in order to maintain it?
And so we don't have to get into that tonight, just to clarify.
Yeah.
So the idea for tonight is just to understand, is this a direction we want to pursue? Clarifying this in a format that allows us to be a little bit more targeted and detailed in this format. If so, then we take inputs about these specific kinds of things, because none of that gets done by the subcommittee. Those are committee conversations about what you want included. And then we take it and draft it.
Right. I'm trying to understand what you've included in this one and why.
Yeah.
And so that's why I'm asking these clarifications.
Yeah.
Okay. So that is another one. The language that speaks to how much to contribute each fiscal year. To me, that's budget planning, not policy. So I'm kind of wondering, for example, it got taken out of the OPEB section, but kept in the general stabilization section.
So the
Why
OPEB,
not treat?
I can speak to why it came up. The OPEB, what got inserted in OPEB is the local language, because the OPEB funding mechanism is in the contract. So we have to fund it contractually by the delta of the existing plan when we negotiated an OPEB trust fund and the cost of the plan this year, and put in the balance of what we would have spent on the old plan. The savings of what we have now versus what we would have spent on the old plan. It was a richer plan, so they're perceived savings. So any savings that we got from making the shift has to be redirected into the OPEB fund. So that's where we could really get in. We could spend like a whole session on what do you want to call the 150K? Is it it's not taking out of reserves, but it's preventing us potentially from fulfilling a contractual obligation. However, there's a clause or an intent in that language that the reason that we have it is to fund retiree health when retiree health may result in a reduction in force or loss of program. So that could be an afternoon of workshop on its own.
So my point here is I don't think inclusion of amounts per fiscal year is a policy statement. I think that's a budgeting process.
The two paragraphs in red are actually the language included in the Triton policy. That is not necessarily our draft.
that's what's up
language.
for
That was, yes,
conversation.
that is what
If
Triton
we
had.
go this route,
And that's how they
we-
established their fund. They didn't have a fund prior to this policy.
Okay,
So that was just really for.
so it may not apply to us.
Correct.
Okay.
But it does bring up a really good point that a conversation that we haven't had at the committee level, which is we need to look at how are we going to fund our stabilization account and have that conversation moving forward. And we haven't had a chance to do it yet, but this brings that up and gives us a venue for doing so. An appropriate venue.
I actually think it's something we should be doing, and we should do it in the context of budgeting. So my last point is that there is almost no declarative language in here about what our policy is. It's very much like may be used and we can or suggest, right? It's not like, here's what our policy is.
I would disagree with that.
So all this to say, I think, to me, we're not resetting, but it feels like to work through a lot of these things would be going back a ways. And we were so close with this version.
So I agree that it would require more work. I personally am of the opinion that it's work worth doing. If we've been 25 years without a reserves policy and we're going to put one in place, I think it's worth taking the time at the committee level to work through some of these things that are still unanswered. And while it may feel like we were so close, some of these questions we didn't get a chance to discuss and direct at a committee level. And they are important things that we need to, because there are inputs from everyone, including the people who worked on the original draft, that are valuable on those. And that moving in this framework gives us a chance to do that without getting rid of the work that was already done. It takes it and carries it forward, but there is an acknowledgement there that we're not done. And I mean, if that's something that people don't like, that's their choice. I'm okay with moving it forward and doing the work to make sure we get it complete the first time so that we're not having to revisit it down the line. But that's why we vote. It's at the direction of the full committee.
What are we voting?
Any other
For this
comments?
so.
Well, any other comments about this framework that people have questions on?
I think she's asking what the vote is.
Yeah. That's my questions about the framework. What are we?
Stay with the old format or look at transitioning to the new proposal.
I think the motion was specifically about,
Correct.
well, moving forward with the new format.
I found. I agree. Well, I think OPAS is a little bit, if we want to include everything in here, I do feel like when I first read it, it's a little bit messy, like a lot of things. Granted that a lot of information over here might not apply to us, so we're still working on it. But I always go by the overall guideline of when you have a policy, keep it at a high level. You want to be very specific about what you want people to follow, but don't go into the nitty-gritty details. And then that's when, there's always going to be debate. There's always going to be things that is like, when you go into the details, then that's when the problem becomes. That's my take. If you guys want to continue to work on this, why not? But I agree with Jake. I feel like we already did the first read. If this is similar enough to the first one, why not edit the original instead of completely redo?
May I respond?
Sure.
Just to clarify, it almost is. It's taking the information in the original and merging it into a cleaner template that works for a little bit broader, that does expand. And so we can work through that. But like I said, if we're not talking about which inputs tonight, the level of detail, that's something that we can come back and refine through. But I hear your point, but I just would say it's not starting over in any way. We literally just were able to take all the good work that's already been done and put it in a format that works and expands a little bit.
John, do you have any questions?
No,
I would just urge. I'm not married to either one, and I don't feel particularly strongly about which direction we go. I do see some advantages in the new proposed one. Whichever direction we go, we need to grapple with the fact that we already have more than 8% reserves. We have 1.5 million in our stabilization fund, and we have 1.9 million in projected capital costs in the next 5 years.
It's 2.9.
In what?
5. Let's look at one.
1.9 in the next 5 years. And so according to the policy that's on the table, we have too much in reserves. But looking at our projected capital costs, we don't have enough.
Which is why we didn't put a hard cap in place to be. Right? Right. My particular opinion on this is that, when I reviewed the Triton policy, it did seem to address some areas that were to be considered gaps in the original draft that we put together. So I would like to incorporate, this new agreement brought to us into what we've already put together. That would be my recommendation.
The only observation that I made, or that I have, is that I think the Triton policy actually is a statement of policy and intended use and articulates the importance of reserves to managing the budget. That may be where it gets into more details that we're comfortable with, but it kind of stakes out there's a level of clarity around each of the buckets and the importance that they play in the financial health of the district. So that's where I feel like it goes a step further. From my perspective, that's helpful. But that's just one individual's perspective.
All right, if there aren't any other questions, I think we can vote on whether to accept the inclusion of this new draft into the subcommittee's work. So all those in favor? All those against? Any abstains? All right, so that passes to include this new draft into your one.
We will,
I would say next would be a first read.
Yeah.
So are there any technical inputs that should be considered?
I think until we get the information from the auditor, because that was the thing that we really wanted to bring to the committee first,
Okay.
was whether or not the auditor and financial advisors agree on the things that are in here that are stated.
Okay.
As far as they go to our committee.
We got to do that before our next.
Right.
Yes.
We will move forward and report back. Yeah.
All right. Excellent. I can report out on the negotiation team. We did not meet. Next up is the superintendent's report.
I'll try to do this quickly because we have the whole team waiting. So I had mentioned that Stella and I had some similar items on our list. So I will start with, as this is coming up, first item on my list, busing challenges persist. So I think if the community has ever agreed on one thing, we are all very frustrated with Salter Bus Company and their responsiveness to our concerns. I have to say the person who is our representative, who we call when there is a problem, is responsive. But it's a bit beyond her control to come up with a resolution, as it is a bit beyond our control to come up with a resolution. That being said, we are looking at, everything is on the table for potential direction change from Salter. So we have a contract. They can't provide the services in that contract. We do have an option to go elsewhere, which sounds great. But we have a couple of hurdles to get over to realize that. One, it's a market that is known for having monopolies. So are there other available bus services in the area that can provide service to us? Two, to acquire additional or change service, we likely will have to go for a request for proposal process, so go out to bid on new services. So Michelle's already exploring those options. So we don't really want to cut off a bus service before we can replace it with something else. So in addition to being very pesky customers in trying to work this up the chain, we are also exploring other potential vendors in the area that could provide, we could transfer services to in the beginning of the year. It's probably what, a 60 to 90-day transfer process. So whether or not that's helpful over the winter months, just know that we're doing everything we can to explore all avenues. Michelle and Allison Collins actually have talked quite frequently about whether or not getting a small fleet of vans would be advantageous to us. I don't know if you want to speak a little bit about what that process would be and.
Yeah, so actually the Triton Regional School District does the same thing. So again, piggybacking on a solution that actually works for another district, which is a great idea. They lease a couple of activity vans, so they're multi-purpose vans. The only restriction is they cannot take students to or from home. So they would be for after-school activities or smaller athletic events and such like that, or even in-school field trips for, if it's for a smaller group, or just a single classroom. So we are exploring that option at this time as well. It may result in some cost savings in the long run, might not, but really our bottom line is we need the service. Our students are not receiving the transportation services that they deserve. We need to find alternative solutions. So we're exploring those opportunities right now.
Okay. I had forwarded you an email from a member of the public who wanted to know how Salter is financially responsible for the situation, given the fact that we all know it is a huge expense. It's a big line in our budget. So if they're not fulfilling their end of the bargain, are we getting money back if the buses are not running?
Well, if you looked at the budget actual report, you notice we haven't paid them yet this year. So we haven't paid for any service. That is
Maybe that's why the buses stopped driving.
right?
Just
Which is another
kidding.
indicator of kind of.
Yeah, they just billed us. Unfortunately, our contract does not call for any financial compensation due to lack of service unless they're not covering a certain day. It's billed by school day that they're operating. So we are in discussions with them if they can offer us some type of financial offset because they're not fulfilling their contract 100%. But there's no automatic loss that provides us any financial relief.
With money for next time, or is it?
Yes, absolutely.
When you sign that contract with them, does that include like an estimated number of after-school activities or athletics events? Or is that all supplemental that gets tacked on, you know, beyond just the normal pickup, drop off?
That gets tacked on to our base contract.
Okay, so basically leasing the vans, it would be pretty seamless if you
Yes,
intended to do so.
absolutely.
I haven't dealt with this kind of thing since I was in school. Can you just run me through why we can't do for after-school activities and stuff, so Stella's not stuck in Westwood for 4 hours? Carpooling and that sort of thing. What is the reasoning we don't do that sort of thing anymore? Is it not allowable or is it a practice?
It's more of a liability issue.
I want to tread carefully because I think there are some instances where we're responsible for the travel.
Okay.
And it shouldn't be, and it can't be carpooling because it's an aspect of the curriculum and the program and kids are entitled to get to and fro. And we have to provide it.
Got it.
Then there's the general liability, safety concerns, who's driving, are they quarried, are they driving on our behalf? If kids are all responsible for getting to their own after-school activities, are we really provide? So I think there are technical questions, there are safety security questions, and then there are philosophy questions. It's not a great practice. So if it's something that, I think it becomes more messy than what we have already.
People who haven't, like me, who haven't dealt with this since we were in school,
Mhm.
so the answer is it's a different world now.
Mhm.
It's a different
And
circumstance.
then we're gonna enter the student driver component of it as well. And we'll just go down a rabbit hole. So I think there's a lot to consider if we ever really wanted to. And I don't feel like I don't have a solid response that I'm comfortable with for tonight. I think the bus is solvable. I don't think in the immediate, it's gonna just change overnight. In discussions, Michelle was briefing me today, they do have a pipeline. They've got people in the training program. So it looks like there's more of driver availability coming along. A lot of what we have suffered through and isn't construction related is call-ins and not having a quick fill-in. Keep the bus moving. So we're gonna continue to work the situation. Hopefully we'll get some relief in the next few weeks.
Small questions that are at this.
Yeah, I think we should get. the
Are they
document.
not, why is? We're also hearing a lot about the communication that goes along with this, right? At what point do we find out that our kid isn't going to get picked up by the bus this morning? surely they know before the bus is supposed to leave that there is nobody driving the bus that's supposed to be leaving the parking lot.
Sometimes the buses are at the homes, sometimes the drivers just don't show. Sometimes the drivers call in late on a Sunday night. So then by the time everybody catches up with the calls, the company included, and then gets it to us at 6:40 the next morning.
Right.
So we're doing everything we can internally to streamline communications. Michelle's taking the calls. We're pushing things out from central if need be. We're trying to do targeted communications to, we've redone all of the bus groupings in Blackboard. We're testing. We're trying to do all we can to, once we learn, execute the communication. Sometimes we have struggles on that company side of that as well.
So I think that this problem disproportionately impacts the Essex families just in terms of driving distance and the time that it takes out of their day to drive their student here and drive home. Is it possible for those parents to drop their kids at a different bus stop? How full are those buses?
Question.
I'm sure. We can certainly find out.
I'll say, you know, I get dropped off at the confluence of all three, or at least two of the Essex routes, and the first one drove right by and the second one never came. We was standing there and I had to go take it away. So, I mean, if the company knows that the bus isn't gonna be running.
Especially on
is
the
there-
route that they're already
is-
passing.
Yeah, and they see kids standing there, is there a room to get them? Yeah.
It's a disaster.
Well, thank you.
My other question is, I remember at the Day on the Hill, there being discussion that at state level, they're looking into kind of the bus companies generally and making sure that everything's on the up and up and that this isn't a situation where people don't have choices in the ways that they should and that sort of thing. So I guess you don't have to answer it right now, but should opportunities come up for advocacy in some way, if there's anything that we as a committee can do to advocate for a change, please share those because that's something we've all discussed before.
Yep.
Interest in supporting at the state level, it's a statewide issue.
It's the only other thing it does not do anything to address the problem or make anybody feel better about it. But Salter was a local company that's now been acquired by a much larger company, Beacon Mobility. So we're getting a little bit of that runaround piece too, where I don't know that it was not always perfect, but there was a local owner who was known, and you could get the owner on the phone. Now it's very hard to figure out who to go to after we get the general person who tries to manage the routes. You know, and like I said, sometimes the communication's delayed because she's out driving the buses, because that's her default. Like if they're really down driver, she's out. So that's why sometimes we're waiting to get the responses from that. So, and it is an imperfect situation. We have no excuses. People should be getting better service. So we're just going to pursue all avenues to get some relief.
Thank you.
I do like,
That's a good idea.
we've been trying to organize the bus routes a little bit more cleanly, so.
I would much rather drive my child to Woodman's than Manchester.
Maybe even talking to them about coming up with some larger consolidated stops to make it flow better.
Thank you.
Next few are just a couple of FYIs on projects that we're working on that are aligned to different sets of goals that we have. I think I mentioned this year, the leadership team is engaging in an observing and analyzing teaching course here on site. So we have about 7 or 8 sessions over the course of the year where we're looking at our observation practices to ensure that we have a calibrated eye toward practices which result in good student outcomes. So that's been going well, and an exciting piece of what we're doing. We're continuing to review the phone policy and the alignment of the phone policy K-12. I think we've established one thing, that K-8 seems to have a more articulated policy. And I think Stella's done a nice job of kind of framing it, that it exists at the high school. Maybe we just need to clarify what it is and make sure everybody's on the same page for implementing. But I know that's work that's ongoing. We have not forgotten about and continue to have discussions about schedule alignment at the middle high school and how we can achieve that. And the library task force, see, we're all on the same page, is kicking off on 11/20 to figure out what we can do with this space. And, you know, I mentioned before when the issue comes up, I think there is a healthy struggle between having two different schools under one roof and having different needs at the middle school level and the high school level. And how do you create a shared space that can meet the broad spectrum of need? So I think that's something that we're going to have to struggle through a little bit, in addition to looking at just kind of what is the future of programming for libraries. Two shout outs. This works. Tammy might be able to pop up. To just here, she left. Well, great news for the middle high school, and the Julie's here. They're going to Gillette on Thursday to receive the award. But they are being honored with the sportsmanship award for Division 5 this year. So
Awesome.
that's a really nice piece for the high school. Pretty indicative of some of the work that I know they've been trying to do over the years around empathy and treating others the way you want to be treated. And then just a shout out, this is surfaced. It used to say Allison and Avi, and this year Allison and Michelle were asked back to the special ed directors workshop to present on best practices in finance. So, you know, we don't talk about it enough, but we are leaders in special education, programming and financing, and recognized as such statewide. So hats off to them for doing that presentation. And then my public service announcement, I've got too many clickers, is we've got the Parent Ed series is going to be focused on digital wellness this year. So coming up on November 14th, your email is probably saturated with notices about this. Right now, we're having Carrie Gallagher from St. John's does this work for them, has been kind of in the thick of it around what do we do with devices, whether they be phones or Chromebooks or iPads of sort. Where should we be on technology? How do we raise healthy digital citizens? So I think it's going to be a good opportunity for us to dig in a little bit and explore, you know, when the ban question came up at the beginning of the year, I know it felt like an unsatisfactory answer, but we have been starting to have conversations about this at leadership, try to improve our understanding of the emerging technologies and how we can prepare ourselves to be knowledgeable enough to create a pathway of preparedness for our kids. So this is part of it, in that we would like to invite the community into that conversation and help educate everyone, because while there are clearly there's research out there and thought on some very decisive things to do, but I don't know that that's going to solve all of the problems. So I think there's a lot more to consider, and this is our first step in that. And that's it on my general report for the evening.
Maybe here now.
Tammy, do you want to talk a little bit about the sportsmanship award?
Sure. So the District 5 Sportsmanship Award is awarded yearly. There's 9 districts in the state of Massachusetts, and District 5 is the Cape Ann League, so also the Cape Ann League, the Northeast Conference, the Commonwealth Athletic Conference, and the Greater Boston League. So it's about, I believe, 40 schools so we're top of 40 for this year for sportsmanship. So I think it speaks volumes to what our student athletes and coaches are doing on the field, our community members that are attending the games, and there's still work to do. So I just hope we can improve every year and be a good representation of our community. So it's been a big deal. We're really proud of. So,
Any questions for Pam? Any final questions?
Real quick question, on the middle high school schedule, are the school councils part of that conversation this year?
Not yet. I've asked the principals and Heather to get together and try to put some models together for consideration before we go blank slate. There are some real technical challenges. This gets back to the 2 things under one roof. One of them being the stumbling block of lunch. So I've asked them to sketch out what some potential options are, and then we're going to broaden them, going to set feedback options for people so we can get people to weigh in. But I think we need to go out to people with something. I guess what I'll clarify is we are not trying to solve an educational issue here or create I think the schedule you're going to want 5 years from now or 10 years from now is not what we're trying to achieve here. We have some real inefficiencies of running on blocks that don't align during the day, and we're trying to get to a place where the times of the day align so we can realize some sharing opportunities and then build from there. So this is a technical step one to achieve some efficiencies and realize some opportunities that were pointed out last year while we work through the strategic plan in our instructional growth, where you might be looking at a very different use of time, 5 to 7 years down the line.
Thanks.
So moving on to continued business, what would you suggest we tackle first?
Could we do the assessment report?
I don't see why not.
I don't think we have a select that everyone here to. Okay, so we'll try to get them next time. So while they're getting ready or coming up, come on up, everybody. I can just give you a very kind of big picture. Heather, which one are you on here? Ah, that one. I'm going to make you a presenter in a second. So just to turn, before I turn it over to Heather and the team, this is our annual assessment review. And I'm going to share just a couple of, I'll bookend it with the big picture takeaways. So I would say, well, what's going to happen is we're going to dive deep into things that we're seeing at each of the schools. We're going to highlight areas that we want to work on. But what I don't want to get, where I don't want us to get lost completely in that big picture, overall, the state of the union is very strong when it comes to student achievement. But we know that there are key areas that we need to improve upon to move that needle. One being the high needs subgroup area and closing the gap. And then the relevancy of learning to students, which is something that came through in the vocal data. So the MCAS, the iReady data shows us that we've got some subgroup struggles that we need to address so that everybody is recognizing the positive state of the union. And then the vocal data is telling us that we have kids who are feeling very safe and secure in their buildings, but that maybe we need to relate what we're teaching to their world a little bit more to get them more engaged. So how can we bring in student voice more? And they're going to go into greater detail of how that looks in each building. But as we walk away, I would say those are the target areas that we're going to be focusing on going forward to try and improve general achievement school-wide. The other big positive that I take away from the reporting that I've seen is that it's validating what we've laid out as plans to go forward, where we're seeing the positives in terms of success of a safe and healthy learning environment. That's been our focus. We're peeling back on that now. And what's emerging from there is kind of the intervention piece, the coaching piece. How do we improve tier 1 instruction? So how do we reach more learners or different types of learners? And then how do we create an authentic learning environment, which is more engaging for kids? So I think we're in the right place in our own planning process. And the data is saying that we still have work to do, but that the goals that we've set are aligned with the work that needs to be done. So big picture, things are in good shape. We know we have identified areas that we want to improve upon, and we have a plan to get there. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to the team to take you walk through the day.
All right. Heather, you're up.
All right, here we go.
Already
People again. All right, so while it is a lot of data, we're going to do a superficial touch on a lot of different data sources. That being said, for those of you that love data as much as I do, there's an incredibly deep appendix for those who want to dig in a little deeper, and warmly invite you to play the data sandbox, should that tickle your fancy. Okay. As with anything, we're driven by our vision and where we are continuing to strive for on behalf of our learners in the district. And this is really where we center around all of the way we're looking at things, what we're looking for, and how we measure our progress towards this growth. Like Pam, this is our preview of our summary page. So here's where we're seeing some of our strengths across the district, and we're going to be pointing some of those out more specifically in some of the data we're going to show you, and also naming some of those continued areas for growth. Some of these are areas Pam just mentioned that we're continuing to work on, that we have a plan for, and some of them are coming into more clear focus as we're doing a more strategic analysis of really targeting what those needs are, where they live, and what our action steps are. And our building leaders will be able to tell you more specifically what that's going to look like and what that's already looking like at their building levels as well. For those who are sort of wondering, like, why are we looking at these? What about all that other information we don't have about kids? This is just a nice reminder of every day our teachers are gathering information about their students in a variety of ways. And that's sort of the base of that pyramid, right? Like the big base of your food pyramid, it's the most of the stuff, it's the good stuff you want to really lean into. And that's what's giving you that immediate information about where our students are, how are the instructors responding with their instruction there, and adjusting to support the learners in their rooms. Up above is the data that we have access to, right? Because we don't collect that every single day nuanced data. Some of it's not collectible and also not really appropriate because it's a moment in time. So we get the chance to really look on a more generalized lens about trends in our district, and we can ask big questions, but usually the answers for what do we do about that is in that nuanced, more detailed day-to-day data. So just know while we don't see it, instructional decision-making process, we have access to, and we will dig into these different data sources that are telling us benchmark assessments, data about our students and our population, and then also some of those more summative assessment trends. Okay. This is just a nice reminder of some of the demographic representations of our district. These are the components from DESE that just sort of outline and identify some of those identified student demographic groups. I want to zoom in again, I did last year on the high needs population. This district as a whole has had a transition in the percentage of students that would be identified falling in the high needs. High needs category is a Massachusetts state category. It's not a national category, and it's something that our state uses to identify groups of students who have typically been at risk for academic success due to other causes, and they say we need to look and monitor how this group is performing. Students who would be identified as a student with disability, which means they have an active IEP, an English learner or former English learner, and or low income would be qualified as a student identified as high needs. So over the last 10 years, we've seen that percentage shift in our district from 18.6 to 29% of our population. This data slide is it's the same visual I shared last year, and I use the same representation to represent essentially a class of 20, no column class size here, but just to show a visual of our attendance rates. On the furthest left is we had about 36.6 of students across our district that were absent for 10 or more days last year. This is the 23-24 school year. 8.9% of our students in our district were identified as chronically absent, which by the state means 10% or more of our school year. And we had a total of 15 students across district, which is a little over 1% that were chronically absent for 20% or more of our school days. So I did the coloring of the numbers just to give you an idea of a teacher in their classroom day to day, what that impact would look like. And you may remember this was identified as a strength because I want to share this trend over the last 3 years. So blue is 21-22, orange was 22-23, and green is this most recent school year, 23-24. We like seeing that decrease, which means less students are presenting as absent for 10 or more or chronically absent. So this trend line is one to celebrate. It was an area that we identified as a weakness last year, and kudos to our leaders and the educators in our buildings who worked really hard to partner with families to make sure that students and families were getting what they need to support students' attendance at school. So I don't know what is happening, but certainly a celebration of what's happening. So this is a shift in a data set. Vocal is data that is gathered at the end of MCAS, at the end of the testing MCAS window. Students are asked to share their perspective about the climate of their school. And they use 3 different categories to determine the level of school climate. They use engagement, safety, and environment. Students are asked to grade 4, 5, 8, and 10. So it's not every single year. And they're asked in a developmentally appropriate way questions that they agree with or disagree with on a Likert scale to say how they feel about how their school feels. So the gray is the state, the orange is our district as a whole. Now, please note, this isn't like a percentage like we're striving for 100. When the students are rating, they're rating a favorable climate would be like most often or most of the time or always. And then they take that percentage and turn them into a scale score. So this is saying 51 to 70 points would be a favorable climate, 70 points or more is a most favorable climate. And this is looking at percentage of responses to students who are saying, always true or mostly true. So within that, within our school, to share across levels, I'm losing a little data on the bottom. I don't know who's zooming in. Just this one line. Sorry, it's me. There it is. Oh, perfect. So this is at the high school. So places of, I pulled just a few samples so you can see the type of language students are responding to. So 99% of our students in grade 10 last year said adults working in the school treat all students respectfully regardless of the students' identity. The areas in red are the areas that we would flag as opportunities for us to improve. For example, in at least 2 of my academic classes, students are asked to teach a lesson or be part of a lesson. So there's a little bit of that partnership of the work that we've been doing. There's some of the strengths and the work that's been happening with that SEL inclusion and sense of belonging, and some of the opportunities for growth, building in that authentic learning that's really centering students' real lives and their voices in that process. Here is the middle school. So this is only grade 8. So this would not be reflective of all 3, but they just do a moment of time there. And again, another place to celebrate that there's a theme across the schools of strength of the adults working at school, treating students respectfully, and opportunities to grow. There's a theme here. In my classes, my teachers use student interest to plan class activities. So it's 39%. So we're certainly following some trends across our levels. And this is our elementary data. You'll see the blue bars, the middle blue bar is Memorial, and the lowest blue bar is Essex. And this is an aggregate of their 4th and 5th grade responses. We see a strength of 100% of our elementary students say, my teachers are proud of me when I work hard in school. And then an opportunity for growth. When I'm home, I'd like to learn more about the things we're learning in school, so only 36%. So important data for us to learn from and help inform. I mean, is that real? If it's connected to their real life, we're excited to continue to learn and grow. So yes, there's some themes throughout that we're definitely noticing and using as an opportunity for us to target in our support. All right, new assessment. This data set is we're going to call it our benchmark assessment. This is taken 3 times a year in grades 1 through 7, and then twice a year in kindergarten and twice a year in 8th grade. Twice a year in 8th in kindergarten because we don't start their assessment till a little later in the year based on both when they're developmentally ready and state guidelines. And twice a year in 8th grade because our 8th grade class at this point has 4 MCAS tests that they take, 2 days each. So we decided that it was a little much to add this additional layer on, especially because this assessment does cap at the end of 8th. So they do not continue it on in high school. Therefore, it would not set them back when you're thinking about the assessment being a continued measure of growth. So there's a rich data set. We have historical trends, but those 2 grade levels. This is a trend to show you the progression of student learning over the course of last year. This is looking at reading. And what you will see here is these colored bands, and it's real small text. The stripy green, as we call it, says mid or above grade level. The solid green is early on grade level. The yellow is 1 grade level below. The solid red is 2 grade levels below, and the stripy red is 3 or more grade levels below. Now, I share this because the way iReady measures student progress is end of year expectations. So in the fall, when students enter, we expect students to be entering 1 grade level below. If I am a 4th grader, I'm entering at the end of 3rd grade. So in the fall, we would expect students to be in that yellow or above, or we would hope that that was the place that they would be entering in the fall. And so we continue to help them grow and move over the course of the year. So for anybody who received the iReady letters and there was worry or panic that that goal and that expectation that we would set is our students maintained that learning over the course of last year, and they're entering ready to learn. Yellow means solid yellow in the fall means ready to learn for this grade. So this is a progression of our trend over reading. I will say the spring data, just because of the way it pulls, it still pulls in whatever the last assessment is. So it's slightly skewed because our eighth graders, as I told you, they did not take the spring assessment, but it pulls their winter assessment data forward. So if the students are not quite maybe at that end piece, it's skewing it just slightly, but we do not have that spring data for them.
So this was last,
This is, yes, 23, 24. This is the math
Yep.
information. So again, this is an aggregate, this is across district, it's K-8, and following that trend of that fall to winter to spring assessment windows across our grades, and it's a progression towards grade level mastery of those content. And as a preview for this coming year, this is how we entered this fall. So once again, we're talking about where we would hope students would be entering, or our goal for students would be entering in to start that year within that solid yellow or above. And what you will see is both the percentage across the district and also the raw numbers underneath each of those categories. And that was in September of this year. We're shifted on to the new data set. This would like to be touching on all of them. Accountability is a measure that we're reintroducing that wild, and it was here before, paused during COVID, and it's really it started back up last year. Last year was the first year the state brought the accountability measures back. And accountability is a way that they're helping each district look, so it's not just straight MCAS raw data. It's helping you look both at our progress towards trends over time and our progress against ourselves. Accountability is created, oh, goodness. All right. Comes from targets that are set. So based on where your prior year's performance was, the state establishes targets. They establish targets at a district level, and then additionally, each individual school has targets that are set across different criteria. And then each year, the state measures to see, did you achieve that target? If you achieve that target, you get a set number of points. And then they translate that into a target percentage to say about how many, or not about, but what is the percentage of the points you got towards your target? So if you met every target, you would get a 75% criterion reference target. Because meeting your target is a 3 out of 4. So this is sharing with you our district accountability. And again, something that's coming back into the world of data. Accountability is a multi-year measure. So this is something that the newest year is weighted the most heavily, but it brings in the previous year's scores that have an additional impact on accountability. We as a district are making substantial progress towards our targets. And then you can see each of our schools underneath are identified as the target percentage and their accountability percentile, which means as compared to other schools at their level, level as in, are you a K-8 school or your high school? That is where they would fall on the percentiles compared to the others in that market. To dig a little more deeply, I expect you all to be able to read all of these numbers. Cover your left back. This is one of the many charts that is. So when I say target towards each of those criteria, it is a large data set that they use to set targets towards for each of your district or school accountability measures. And then they say, here's your personalized target that you have to meet. And then each year we're going to rate you on each of those pieces. I want to zoom in a little here to shout out some of the opportunities for growth and improvement we saw, meaning areas we did not perform where we would want to or expect to, is really in that for the achievement. That's when we say achievement, we mean results on MCAS. How did our students do in results? So that is an area that we did not meet our target in a few areas, and certainly something we're continuing, you'll see us continuing to focus on that at building levels and district-wide. The place for celebration is our growth. So we met or exceeded our growth expectations, which is how students do compared to, so if we took the test as third graders, and then the next year we took the test as fourth graders, they say, compared to this group of third graders that got the same thing as me last year, how did you do compared to them? And how well did you? So that growth rating, where we want students to be growing at least as well as, right, their peers that they faced before, and that's using a percentile rating. So our students we met our targets across the board there. Additionally, the chronic absenteeism, I just want to name, it was a target area for us last year. Can't learn if you aren't here, floors across the board. So again, kudos to the hard work and focus that happened there. And then also there were floors down the line for the high school with the group of students that were identified as lowest performing students. And that lowest performing literally means the students who were the lowest, I believe it's 20% the last time they took MCAS. And how did they do as compared to that last time? So exceeded your targets there, which is a really big celebration. I did want to share this. This data is not released publicly, but I thought it was something that was, I don't know if it will, but it was something that I thought was worth sharing in that this past year, as I shared, our 8th graders took their 4th MCAS, which is a civics MCAS, and they were field testing this MCAS to begin to roll it out. It will be an official on the books MCAS test for students this current school year. The green is our 8th grade students, and the blue is the state across those different categories of learning, which is a wonderful celebration. And I thought tonight would be a great time to share an example of a question. A student created the following diagram to show some of the actions a person takes while running for the president of the United States. Select 2 other actions a person would most likely take when running for president. You can pass that. You are free to go vote. Hopefully you already did. But this is an example of what our students in 8th grade are being asked to do this year. There's 2 different components of the civics. I won't go down that rabbit hole, but just thought it was worth sharing those results. Okay, another measure. Are you sick of hearing me talk? Yeah, I know you want to hear the principles. I just want to take a moment to share about our advanced placement. So this is a measure that's really looking at our high school and most often our upper grades within our high school. So last year during the 23-24 school year, we had 404 AP tests taken. 149 different students took at least one test. Of those 149 students, 93% of those students got a score of 3 or more. 9 of the 21 courses that we offer had 100% of their students passing the APs, passing being 3 or more. And of the 404 tests that were taken, 139 of those scored a score of 5, which is the highest score that you can. So those are some pretty impressive numbers. And adding in that idea of that 93% of our students with score 3+ really means that the majority of our students that are taking these courses are meeting that criteria to show that they're understanding that material enough to be qualifying as passing that college level course. So there's not just students taking it. And a shout out with that bronze award for those percentages and the access award, which is that students from the targeted demographic groups are taking them in equal numbers of our. All right, then pass it up. All right, on that. Sorry, Julia, you can double shout it out.
I will say, talked about it when I was here last year. The Bronze Medal and Access Award is something that we're celebrating. And we just talked about last year, but this year with 2025 AP exams, we have 162 students enrolled. So we're getting up there a little bit more. And we're going to take 394 exams in the spring of 2025. I feel about that stuff. Still, it's very exciting.
Sorry?
You are free to go whenever you need to.
Okay. Yeah, that number.
It's all good. For our accountability data, we're very excited about making the substantial progress towards those targets. Our attendance improvements have gone with chronic absenteeism, with tardies, with dismissals. I shared some of that data last time. So we are making our improvements, which makes us very, very pleased. Our high needs category last year received 0 points for chronic absenteeism, which is not what we want. And this year we got 4. So that was a big, big improvement. And the same thing with advanced coursework. High needs was 0 last year and a 2 this year. So we're making good progress there. I'd love to see that go even further next year. And we did exceed our target for the lowest performing and high need students. So we're chipping away and we're making progress, which we're very happy about. In terms of MCAS biology, exceeding expectations went from 10% to 29% in a year. And we dropped also in the partially and not meeting by 2% as well. So we're making great strides in our bio MCAS. So those are things we're celebrating in the high school. It's great. And areas and opportunities for growth, our percentage of our meeting and exceeding did take a dip in our MCAS numbers.
I know there's some charts in the appendix you can take a look at, but there was a little dip there that we're gonna hopefully course correct and make some changes. In our vocal data, the big thing that I spoke about last time was linking learning and student lives and having students' opinions involved in decision-making. So we're gonna make some steps that way. One of the things we have is that interdisciplinary lesson, professional development we're working on, but just having more student voice in what's going on. And then in MCAS, we're also not necessarily, we're not meeting continued targets in achievement. So what we're hoping to do to solve some of these problems is the department chairs using the department chair meetings to do data reviews, to have targeted department plans moving forward, being more strategic with each department, knowing that each department plays a role in all of these things, even if it's world language, that still can improve MCAS. It's all kind of related. Building in cross-content interdisciplinary work and allowing teachers the time and what they need to get that done. And then again, curriculum reviews and some targeted professional development we'll have go out throughout the year. I'd like to add to that though, and to speak to Stella, what Stella said earlier, like with the vocal data, with linking learning to the lives and opinions, making sure that students' voices are heard throughout our, student advisory board, making sure school council voices are heard, making sure students know they can come down and ask us questions in the main office if they have any questions. So just making sure we are answering things if there's concerns about what's going on.
Onto the middle child. So there's a lot of similar things you'll see here. We made substantial progress towards our targets, which is great. We exceeded our targets in chronic absenteeism. Our growth percentiles across the board were moderate. I'd love to see more high growth, but moderate I'll take. There's one area there that was low growth that we'll talk about in terms of concerns. Grade 8 math exceeded their targets and they were on the cusp of high growth, literally 1 point away. So that's really good news too. Our growth targets were met in math by all students, which is a good thing. Growth is really something that is an important number. Heather talked about the difference between achievement and your MCAS score, and your growth is how you're growing compared to peers that scored similarly to you. So we're looking for improvements in growth numbers. So meeting them is good. We need to start moving the needle in more of the exceeding and high growth numbers. So we have a good readiness level for our kids across the board. So Heather was talking about the yellow up through the striped green on iReady. So this data shows us that in the fall, these percentages of students in each grade level, be it reading and math, are showing a readiness for the content area at their grade level. Happy with 6th and 8th on both accounts. 7th is a red flag for me, and I can talk a little bit about some of the specific things we're doing in that area. So grade 6 math has been a point of focus for quite some time. We are having a curriculum review this year in math, and I think it will be, next year, sorry. Okay, science is this year, sorry. So it'll be important to look at the transit. Are there any transition issues from a curriculum perspective in terms of the curriculum that's being used at the elementary level and then what they come to when they're here? The middle school is a bit homegrown in our curriculum area. Some of the resources that we have, many of the resources that we have are very dated. So we have been in need of a curriculum focus for quite some time, and I'm very, very happy that the eyes are turning to the middle school and looking at what we can do from that perspective. Geometry and writing consistently year after year are showing as areas that need a focus. I've got English teachers working together. On Friday, our 6th grade team is working closely to look at writing specifically and to align their practices in terms of exactly what vocabulary they use with each other, the approaches that they use, and they're going to put together a abbreviated scope and sequence focused specifically on writing. So I'm looking forward to seeing that information. So the curriculum reviews will be coming, which we're excited about. I think it's time to look at the sequence and depth of our geometry units. When are they being, when are students engaging in that? What exactly is happening? And is it something that might need to be moved around in terms of the scope? student writing is going to be increased at all levels. The sixth grade, we talked about this a little bit at the school improvement plan presentation. We have middle school academy, which is focusing specifically on interdisciplinary writing between math, science and history with middle school academy. They'll be doing more increased writing in all English classes. In terms of seventh grade, I've leveraged our learning center, and for the short term, we're going to look at a handful of students on the cusp of not meeting or partially meeting and meeting. And our learning center teacher is going to work with those students in an in-depth way on math. After the turn of the year, she's going to push into classes in both math and English to demonstrate how do you tackle an open response question? What exactly, what do you do while you're reading it? How do you break it down? And then how do you work into answering it? So that'll be very, very targeted focus on specific skills for the MCAS test. And MSA, as I said, will primarily focus on informational texts, and we're hoping that that focus helps boost up the performance of students in that specific area of writing.
Me. So there's definitely some things to celebrate for Essex Elementary this year. I was not at the table last year when we had this discussion, but I know it was lackluster in terms of the MCAS results from last year. So better news this year. So Essex was identified as a 2024 school of recognition. So it's one of 57 schools in the entire state. So every K through 12 school all throughout the state. Essex was one of them. And so in order to earn that school of recognition identification, it's just based off of a significant improvement in your achievement, growth, and progress towards targets. And that considers all students, particularly those with high needs, to just make sure that everyone's making progress. So overall, like if looking at those numbers, like we went from 22% progress in 23 to 85% progress this year for all students. And our high needs group deserves a big round of applause because in 23 it was 9% progress towards targets to 83 this past year. So there's huge improvement overall in terms of our accountability. We had an increased number of students in meeting and exceeding expectations. So in grade 3 ELA was an increase of 17%. Grade 5 science was an increase of 16%. And then it was math across the board 3 through 5. So I think we're seeing that impact of the math intervention that's taking place in Essex Elementary, with grade 5 having a pretty big jump in their math to an increase of 26%. In grade 5 of students meeting and exceeding expectations. Similar across district, we've had the reduction in chronic absenteeism to reach the full 4 points. I think that speaks to the work that we've done as a district, and then also this work that's been done at Essex over the past years in terms of opening the building up, offering more extracurricular activities to students after school, and just making school a welcoming place where kids want to be. If they want to be there, they'll be there and they'll learn. So I think we're seeing the benefits of that. And then end of year benchmarks for iReady, we saw increases. So this was spring of last year in the amount of students that are performing at grade level or above. So 83% for reading, which is an increase from 8% from the prior year. And then math was 82, which was an increase of 17% from the prior year. So lots to celebrate. Also lots to continue to work on. So as a staff, we had our moment of celebration, and then we dug right into the data to see where the areas of growth still lie. So written responses always comes up, particularly in terms of responding to writing. Idea development is a big piece in just having students expand and provide more details. I know that's something that Sheila talked about last year as well, so it's still an area of focus for us. Similar to what Joanne just said, geometry always pops up, I think because it's done mostly in the spring. And I think one of the big hiccups with geometry is the vocabulary surrounding it. So some things that we're doing, we're maintaining the vocabulary parade in November. So different grade levels are doing themes based off MCAS data. And our 4th grade is actually focusing on geometry. So if you come to our vocabulary parade, you'll see a bunch of 4th graders dressed up as different geometry terms. And then similar to what was mentioned, what Heather said about the vocal data, what came up for us was the real world connections and applications piece. this showed up in both the vocal data and also some of the math in terms of just kids being able to take the math skills and relate it to real world problems. So we'll just continue working with that piece in terms of working with the instructional coaches to help teachers with their lessons. One thing I also want to look at is homework implementation, and sort of what homework is being sent home and what's meaningful for students. So I think Essex kind of did the pendulum swing of homework to no homework, and now we're sort of trying to find the middle ground of what to send home to students that is meaningful and connected to what they're learning at school, to start to make that piece. And I think similar to that as well, in terms of the vocal data, one of the things that had come up is kids not seeing themselves in the book that they're writing. So again, with like the pendulum, we spent all that time like making sure that they had access to diverse cultures and learning about diverse characters. And now they're like, okay, great, but what about like seeing ourselves? So again, sort of finding that middle ground of having that balance between giving them exposure to those diverse books while also making sure that they're able to see themselves in what they're reading at school. That's it. Thanks.
All right, so at Memorial, one of the things that we were most proud of was our accountability rating. So last year, we had our highest accountability rating in the past, I think it's 5 years. It was 94th percentile this year. We were at the 93rd percentile, so right in that same neighborhood. So very strong performance there. We had a number of areas where our students improved in MCAS. So we kind of look at the percent of students that are meeting and exceeding expectations. So we increased in the area of grade 3 math, grade 4 ELA, and grade 5 science. Our grade 5 science area, we had particularly strong performance. We increased from 68% the previous year to 83%. So that was, I just kind of jumped right off the page. So that was a nice 15% increase. Let's see. So a target area that we identified last year when I presented was writing. So I felt like when we looked at the data, there were a number of points that were leaving on the table. So we had a writing initiative last year. Our leadership council got together and said, okay, how can we tackle this situation and how can we get kids excited about writing? We did things like pen pals. We had bulletin boards in the hallways where kids, it was kind of interactive, where kids could put their writing up and they could get feedback as, kind of along the way in the writing process. And are you driving or?
Yeah.
You driving?
Yep.
Can you jump to the appendix to the graph?
Okay. Where are we going?
You know, you do these things to try to make the needle move, and then you kind of hold your breath and move. And so when I'm judging into the data,
This one?
yep, it's right here. Yeah. So topic development. So topic development 2023 is the blue line, the first one, and then we increased in 2024 and also in conventions. So you can see that effort did pay off with students higher on MCAS on the essays in particular. So that was nice to see kind of the fruits of your labor. Jump back to the presentation. Sorry about that.
I'm glad to be a passenger.
Yes.
Oh.
So then when we look at the end of the year benchmark, so iReady in particular, one thing is to look at how they performed in the spring. So in reading, we performed 85% of our students were at or above grade level in reading. And in math, 83% of students were at or above grade level in the spring. But if I look at it from the fall to the spring to really see kind of the growth that happened, when we came in the fall in reading, 57% of our students were at or above grade level. And so we jumped up to 85% in over the course of the year. And then in math, students came in, 34% of them were at or above grade level in the fall, and they increased to 83% at the end of the year. So it's a nice kind of snapshot of the growth that happens throughout the course of the year. So then in terms of MCAS kind of analysis, the way I like to look at things is I like to look at our performance versus the state. So at the elementary level, there are always questions about kind of the developmental appropriateness of aspects of the test or particular questions and that sort of thing. So, you can look at a question, maybe you perform lower on that question, But if the state also performed lower on that, then maybe that question it didn't quite hit the developmental level of the students at that age. But if we look at a question and we scored, 10 points below the state average, that's a red flag for us. Typically, we're like 30 to 60% above the state average. So I kind of take a look at any questions where we are at the state average or below, obviously, and then up, kind of like up to like 10% above the state average. And as I'm going through in ELA, these different kind of themes started coming up. So differences, character traits, and characters' roles or impact in the story, parts of speech, folk tales, identifying the idea, so the comprehension aspect of that, and then punctuation. So some of those things in there are kind of nuts and bolts, like parts of speech and punctuation. But a lot of what I saw was more kind of that higher order thinking in ELA. And then in math, kind of did the same thing. So what popped out was fractions, word problems. These are like multiple questions, like in the fraction area that we were at or slightly below or slightly above the state average. And then also interpreting numerical expressions without evaluating. So that's interesting. So don't solve the equation, just evaluate it and describe it. So that kind of is similar. It's like that deep understanding of concepts that our kids are needing a little bit more growth in. So in terms of action steps, last year we talked about the need for academic coaching. So we have two great coaches that are on board, and they're kind of working their way into classrooms and doing a lot of observing. And they're just about to kind of start that kind of more deep coaching. So we're going to be able to give them different topics in areas that they can provide better professional development as part of that kind of plan that we propose to all of you. So inferences, character traits, and folktales would be a great place for us to have them focus, and then also in math, word problems and fractions, obviously. We also have some pilots going on, and I would say these are thanks to Essex Elementary. So these are some things that they piloted last year. So the building fact fluency program on the math side, and then also the ELA side and phonics integrity. So those are two things that Essex kind of dabbled with a little bit last year, and we're kind of dipping our toes in and share what they're our school as well.
There's one more point on there. It's just something normally missing. There you go. Sorry, John.
Oh, okay, yeah. So, so the last point is we historically, it's in the contract, there's a stipend for a homework club. And over the years, it's just kind of felt a little bit antiquated. And can we get a little bit more out of that? So instead of having a homework club where, I don't know, 6 or 7 kids go and do their homework after school, we try to be a little bit more targeted this year. So we have a first and second grade math facts club. So addition and subtraction, third and fourth grade math fact club. That is multiplication division, and then a study skill club, and then also a book. So a book club with some journaling to kind of get that money in there. So those are ways that we're kind of trying to look at the stipends that we have to get a little bit more bang for our buck there. So we have, I think there's 18 kids signed up for one. There's 11 for the other, and there's 62 for the other. So instead of 6 or 7, we've got 30 or so students, and that the book club hasn't started yet. So that's actually our school adjustment counselor is going to lead actually trying to find the right book. So there'll be additional students doing it as well.
So this is a reminder back for, I think it was maybe the third slide that I shared, just you've heard these pieces coming up consistently throughout and also highlighted each of the schools. So a lot of strength, a lot of incredible hard work definitely by our students, but also by their supportive educators and the building leaders to make that great progress over the course of this past year. And then our areas for growth in those themes that we saw. Really, there's the fact that you hear us continue to focus on some of the same things means, I think that there's a bit of clarity around our areas of need. And I think that Pam mentioned that alignment to some of the action steps and the goals that we've identified as what we need to work on. It is work that we know we need to do, and it's important to see that the data is confirming that work is on the right track, so we can really continue to lean into that focus, that student voice in connection to their learning, being a large one. The continued focus on the effectiveness of our tier 1 curriculum instruction, both that consistent instructional practices and curriculum materials, but also that coherence and that vertical experience as they progress through. And that we're continuing to see that inconsistent achievement across different student groups and demographic groups, measured both on MCAS, but also on other measures that we're getting ready. So that specifically for us at the district level, a lot of this is, in support of or in recognition of the work that's happening at a building level and also thinking about the systemic side of it. That implementation of short-term student intervention. So we were granted we did apply and we received that high dosage tutoring grant from DESI again. So we're currently providing that support rate for the high dosage math tutoring. And then continuing to look at how do we expand academic intervention beyond where it is. So we have an established intervention routine and system that is data informed at that K-5. So expanding that to a larger audience, both building that system out over time, but also in the right now. So our current students that are currently in place that aren't performing to the level that we would hope, what are we doing for this year? So we're working, that is a piece, and our next piece is that now that we spent that time really getting our hands around the data like we did last year, what are those targeted places we can provide and lean in right now to provide that academic intervention support while simultaneously building out the systems. Another big piece around this authentic learning, and that includes that alignment, that articulating what are we teaching when and making sure that we're supporting all learners. So we have some targeted content PD across different departments in the district. There's work happening around authentic learning experiences, both in inventory, understanding where do we have it, where do we miss it, and some collaborative staff work that's happening across that. There's curriculum mapping work. So what's happening, when is it happening, and what does it look like vertically? That's taking place in a few different departments. The curriculum review processes that Joanne mentioned, we're launching the science, technology, engineering. Coming up a little later this year is comprehensive health, physical education. And we're continuing the work that was launched, but is continuing that review in both world language and in our arts programming. And then additionally, that continued implementation of high quality curriculum in our wonders, our investigating history, and the AP Alliance courses work. Additional work to support that authentic learning is following the MEACS review, which again is another point there's an incredible amount of work that took place from our teachers and our leaders to get ready for that process. So once we receive back that feedback, that will help us to really refine our action steps in the short term and also in the long term, in taking those recommendations and making them actionable. The continued focus on the differentiated professional learning to support our improvement in our tier 1 classes. So with thanks to the support from this committee, those instructional coaches to provide targeted training for our elementary teachers in mathematics as well as literacy. We have vertical professional development that's taking place this year to allow teachers kindergarten through 12th grade to actually have professional development together so they can start to learn from and with each other and break out of their departments or levels. And so they are working across these different categories. Cultural competency is also on that list, apologies. So it's UDL, cultural competency, social emotional learning, executive functioning, and technology. So the teachers are working across districts over the course of this year to continue to enhance their instructional capacity, and then also increasing our professional networks outside of Manchester Essex as we go. Our commitment to increasing our routine of data analysis, so it's not just a single moment in time, but that it's a frequent and ongoing behavior that we're doing as more of a collective rather than as single folks trying to really understand it, that it becomes a more routine habit that we're using to analyze it, but then also identify what action steps we're going to take and then monitoring to see if it's having the impact we want. And Pam alluded to this, improving our capacity as instructional leaders through targeted training and support around observation and feedback for our teachers as instructional leaders in our building. And then some of these bullets are just supporting those strategic initiatives from the district improvement plan around continuing the strong work that started with social emotional learning to continue to move it forward while also continuing to support that inclusive and diverse school culture strategic initiative. So a lot of these pieces are going to sound familiar because it's sort of that tail end of those strategic initiative goals that have been identified, not the tail end per se, but more moving into that there was the launch, there was the initial adoption, and now it's that ongoing implementation and sustaining that work. So notes. Because it's a lot. And just a reminder that this document, that strategic plan in the 10 years really driving and centering that continued effort on the opportunity.
Thank you.
All right, I'm sure some people have some questions. John, do you want to start? Do you have any questions?
I mean, things are coming up along the way, but I didn't want to interrupt, so. um, Yeah, maybe it'll come back to me.
Okay.
Sure. You know,
If you want to go back to anything.
we're good. No.
Teresa?
I don't have questions. Can I make a comment instead or?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. The thing that kept coming back to me is this idea that, last year in the past couple of years, we as a committee have spent so much time on the budget conversation. And last year, when we made those decisions, we really kind of took a stand to say, we're going to support you with the resources you need to address these issues. And I think that the success, especially at AES, but certainly across the board, man, that's huge. And speaks volumes to what happens when we listen to the professionals that are hired in this position, give you what you need to give you space to work. And so that really speaks to the work that's gone on. Thank you.
Thank you. That was great. That was a ton of information and presented very concisely, which we appreciate. I have two questions. I'll start with the easier. I think this one is easier. Heather, for the DESE grant for the high dosage math tutoring, was that grant specific to those grade levels, or did we use data to support where we deploy?
Great question. Unfortunately, there's no flexibility. The state has identified.
Looking at our data, and I was like,
Yeah, because the state has identified fourth grade and eighth grade as pretty big lever points for that area, and also grade levels at which they tend to trend down based on state level performance. So those are the two that they targeted. However, as you may recall, last year we utilized some ESSER that were still remaining, and we expanded it at Essex to support 3 and 4 and 5. So that's a bit of what we're wondering about is, with that structure that we know is an established routine, is that a place we want to lead into as well?
and then my other question is more general for everybody. How do we reconcile? I don't know, it seems as though the student vocal data about engagement and feeling like what they're learning is directly related to their lives is conflicting with our focus on raising test scores and building skills that align specifically with MCAS emphasized strengths. How do we balance those?
I guess we try to do every day. We know we have to kind of answer to this data, so we have to attend to it. But I think we try to balance that with things that are relevant to the kids' lives that they're interested in. We try to make learning fun. Learning that's fun isn't always directly targeted to. I mean, you see some of the types of questions that are asked in the past. It's not always, doesn't always hit that, but it might be something that they go and talk about it and want to explore more because it's more interesting. So I think we're gonna try to find that balance like every day.
And I think the vision of the graduate is a way in. We did a loose inventory at the middle school, each class and going through their content, their standards, where are they touching upon the different things. It feels cursory to me at the time. So at this current time, so I really want to engage the middle school teachers and look more deeply at what is this disposition explaining or requiring, and really, how does your work touch upon that, and how can we make it more meaningful? We reported a few years ago when we were doing ADL and other work that where we branched out to all the classes and had kids give us authentic feedback on what they were learning and how they felt about it. And the overwhelming message was, it's not meaningful to me. We want it to be more meaningful, which it is a balance between addressing that and then making sure that they have the skills to take a narrower measured test that they get on one day and, so it's a balance and I just rest in trying to feel confident that we're doing what's good for kids and giving them skills that are necessary for life, not necessarily skills to pass a test. And sometimes the chips just fall where they do.
If I,
Oh,
no, that,
don't forget the piece though. The only other piece I might add to that layer that I think we could look more critically at our own practice as well is the what we teach is driven by the standard. So we know what we have to teach. The how we teach it and the learning experiences we have, that's really where I think we can make the connection. So the information we're learning, the skills we're building, you can do the same thing on a worksheet as you could do in a Socratic circle with students talking about it. You can do the same thing with everybody being the same article versus students having a choice and bringing it in and sharing. So sometimes it's not just the what we're teaching, but also the approach and the how. And one of those learning experiences, both the students are engaging in, but how they show what they know, that there's a chance to make that connection. So it's unfortunately more complex than just coupling like MCAS and authentic, but a bit of it is like our teachers know their core, they know their content. The opportunity is like, how do we advance the way we're engaging with the content to be current and connected to the students that are with us right now.
And if I could just add another layer, because I was right with you on the how, it's different from the what, but also the how we look at these assessments and not looking in retraining ourselves to not look at them in terms of deficits that the students are bringing to the table, but our shortcomings in communicating to the students. Because that's what it was supposed to be. I've been doing this a long time. In the beginning, this isn't a test for kids. It's a test of the system and whether or not we're aligned, delivering and finding innovative ways to reach a variety of learners and communicate to them what they need to know. So somewhere along the way, it became
A graduation.
Exactly.
and I'm still I'm okay with that because I think we need to retool all of it because that's a conversation for another day, but I think there's a lot we can do within the existing system.
Oh, I'm sorry, Doug, you had.
oh no, I was just gonna say that we saw in that presentation, a common metric where we could have use some improvement was the opportunity for kids to teach their class. And whether we want to call it teaching a class or, at least having a presentation to your class, when a kid is responsible to stand up there and present something, they're going to present something that they're passionate about. And so maybe that's an opportunity for them to be more involved, more engaged. So just a thought.
Kind of tying all that in together, a little anecdote from today. So we talked about vision of the graduate and having like, how is the learning? We had a number of seniors leave the building today to go vote. So they took the walk if they could, or they were able to go over and vote in Essex. So one of them upon returning was, I guess, interviewed to gloss their time. So we'll see what happens there. But as it came right out of his mouth. I said, how'd it go? And then he explained, he was so proud. They were all very proud of themselves to be walking out and doing this. And I think that's like, now I understand why I just did what I did in history class for the last 4 years. But he did say, and I did not hoax him, this was vision of the graduate stuff. You got to go and vote. It's exactly what.
He was the perfect person.
Yeah, it really was. I almost wonder if we were to somehow pull the students into vocal data when they're 21 and 22 and then say, how did what you learned in school relate to your life? Would that change? It's part of this is just,
Or
they
maybe
haven't.
just not do it right after.
Well, I was gonna say,
Yeah. In eighth grade where they're like.
yeah, they're also just.
Tell you how I feel.
Yeah, but I think it makes like, that's a perfect example, like this directly related to my life. Not only did it directly relate to my life, but I had an action, like I had a step and something to take ownership of and a responsibility to do. But I was really proud of our students today. They were fantastic.
Credit to the middle school. We have an example right in our own data of how you can marry the two together. Because if you take the eighth grade civics class, it's very much a hands-on, problem-based environment, kind of where we're hoping to get. Not that everything's perfect, but they can sit down and take a test and be successful in the traditional measure, even though they're learning in a more authentic format. So
It's also a very, very passionate teacher, very passionate about the content. So that also,
that's where some of the how can
yeah.
still achieve a positive outcome. So we're psyched. I think we're heading in the right direction. Questions?
I have, I think in the beginning of the presentation, Heather, that you have, the high needs percentage from 18% to 29% over the past 10 years. So I think my question is, do you know what school you are seeing the increase? The second part of it is, does this correlate at all with school choice number? The increase in the decrease over the years.
Well, our school choice number has decreased from 2014 to 20.
School choice out.
Oh,
Yeah.
no, in.
No, I'm talking about the high needs, and I get the high needs include the low income and whatnot, but I'm asking about the school choice out. Does this have any correlation with that?
No. Okay. This just measures the number of special ed students, high need students, and ELL students within our district.
Right, but a lot of school choice out is the disabilities, whether it's severe high needs.
Oh, no, that's a whole different, that's a different level of disability.
So
Yeah.
that's,
No, our out of district number, it holds pretty steady around 20, maybe up a few, down a few in a given year. 25, 2025. And typically, students in out of district placement are health, safety issues. We can't have a cohort, we don't have a cohort for them here, medically fragile students. So their assessments still come back to us if they're able to take assessments. They're out of district.
so, but, sorry,
I'm not trying to take your time, but it's related to this. Do you have the statistics for the state? I'm just curious if our increase is consistent with the state increase, or are we experiencing something unique? Sorry, it's just.
That is a great question, Erica. I don't have that data. To go back to the original, so this is the whole district trend over time. So this is the shift that's taken place from, over 10 years. Students have, moved it right through and completed. So it's the current population we're serving. There in the appendix, there is trend over time of the three groups that would be identified and their trends across. But Joanne, you had wanted me to.
If you go to, I'll know when I see it.
Is it in the middle school?
Yeah, it's
Oh,
the,
sorry. The special education.
yeah.
So that's not overtime.
So Allison
No, but-
has COVID, unfortunately, he couldn't be here tonight. But we also have information, I want to say presentation, it wasn't last year, it was the spring of the year prior, where we went through all of the subcategories of special ed and identified kind of what the percentage breakdown is for each of the disabilities.
This piece is was a data set that Allison and Michelle actually just recently used in their presentation around special education budgets. And she did, Allison's point was to show that, the trending of students being identified to receive special education services and where that tends to happen. So you might find that there's higher rates of special education in those middle age. I believe this is last year's data. Yes, if I'm correct on that. But this is not a trend over time per se. So this is a snapshot of last year. But our district-wide trends, we've seen an uptick in both in all three demographic groups, but our English language learner population has only been an uptick in about 1.5% over 10 years. So it's actually been the largest increase from the 10 years has been low income, and then students with disabilities have had a slight increase as well.
Can I just say that if people have questions about special education, I'm not in person because of COVID, but I am here.
Go ahead, Allison.
Oh, no, I just said if you have questions for me, I am here. I'm just virtual.
I'm not sure if that answered your question.
Did you have
not really, but that's okay.
Okay.
Allison?
So I don't have it broken down by school, but I could absolutely do that.
Yeah.
Yes, I can do that. Yep.
Allison, did you want to speak to the increase in high needs as it relates to special education?
I can speak to that. So our special education numbers haven't changed a whole lot over the past decade, but our percentage has grown because our overall enrollment has decreased. And when you look at special ed I'm looking at the high needs numbers that Heather was showing. When you look at special ed, um, part of the increase is because the special ed percentage has increased, but we also have had growth, substantial growth in low income students and not a lot of growth in English learners. If you want to break that down.
My second question is for the elementary local data. So 60% says that I feel safe sharing my feelings in class. And then there is like 97% that, saying that students learn to care about other students' feelings. So I wonder what is the contribution? And why do a lot of kids don't feel safe sharing their feelings in class in elementary school? And do you see does the data show you which school?
So some of these questions, so it's interesting how the questions are worded from elementary to middle to high school. They try to, and you can kind of see it in, instead of walk through this, they try to word the questions in a way that elementary kids would understand, and how, the way middle school and high school kids would understand. So I think sometimes just the way the questions are written is one piece, but the other is also, I guess we were saying before, developmental. I don't know if 100% of kids are going to want to get up in front of their class and say, gee, I'm feeling really sad today, so, but the fact that they feel safe at school, I think that speaks to, that they learn to care about others' feelings. So, I think that speaks to the environment. I think sometimes it's, like the one about, I learned things in school that I want to go home and learn more about. Some kids are wired that way, some kids, have other interests when they go home. So that's the only thing I can think of.
I would also tag on, I would love to see like a difference in things that I feel safe sharing my feelings with my teacher versus sharing my feelings with my classmates, because I think there's a certain vulnerability you need to have to share it with how you're feeling with your peers. But I feel like I can pretty confidently say that students at Essex, I won't speak for them, but they feel comfortable talking to adults about how they're feeling. So I think it's just a wording of the question, in class. Yeah.
I can't remember, do they give question by question kind of the local and the state?
Yes.
So I'm just curious if that's a question
That's
one
a
of
good
those dip questions that the developmental level, they're not.
I can check.
Yeah, I think last year, I remember reading books in class, include people that are similar to me. I think in Memorial it was like 15%. And I was like, oh, wait, and then when you think about it, like Kim said, we kind of shifted and we added all of these multicultural books. And so it's just, it's just an interesting question. And it's the way the kids read it.
One comment, question. I just want to say quickly, the AP scores, we focused on the fact that we have such a high percentage of pass rates, which is awesome. And I wanted to just pile on that and say the fact that 35% of the kids are receiving the tests are a perfect score is friggin' phenomenal. I've been living this life for the last 4 years with my kids. So that's no joke. These kids are really rocking it. So that's really, that's incredible. The question I had was with respect to the middle school. Joanne, you made the comment or the presentation referenced grade 6 math as a concern, and I can't remember the data, but I just wondered, I know you and Heather had that quick exchange about whether the curriculum review is going to be this year or next year. No, I guess the only thing, my reaction is, should it be this year? I mean, do you think maybe it's worth moving that up if this is an area of concern? Is there a way, is it worth thinking about shifting the review to address it?
I'd be happy to talk with you. I mean, there is a curriculum review cycle and it's very structured over the next several years in terms of when the review happens, when the implementation happens, et cetera. The flexibility around that is something that I'd be willing to discuss, but it's.
This is your, I'm not trying to step into your lane.
Yeah.
My only point is, having listened to this and,
Yes.
and hearing that it's a point of concern, I'm sure you are thinking about it creatively, but since it's something that, I know this isn't the first year we've heard about it, like, it seems like
Yeah.
if there are ways to look at it differently, it's worth thinking about it creatively.
And so I think that's the other piece. A curriculum review process, unfortunately, you're not going to go through it and immediately have a solution. And even during it, there isn't a need. So there's short-term steps we are doing and need to do right now, in addition to knowing that curriculum review process is a critical step that we have to undertake. So whether we move up the curriculum review process or not, there's a bit of a bandwidth piece because it does take a significant amount of both time and staff commitment to do that. There's also a fiscal allocation for resources. So when you go through a curriculum review process, if the recommendation of the team is to consider evaluating and field testing and potentially adopting a curriculum resource, and then going into that idea of a potential 6-year contract with a curriculum publisher, if that's the direction on top of PD, and then also time. So spacing them out is a little intentional. However, it doesn't mean we don't do anything. So I think a bit of it is better understanding where are the buckets, what does that support look like? I know Joanne's been doing some work with reanalyzing that use of that tiered intervention support and what does that look like? And we're also talking about how can we expand that. Right now, intervention support for students while also targeting some of those 6th grade support. So there's additional work happening both in the immediate right now supporting students and then the continued support with that curriculum resources tools, resources that could help us right now. But we can certainly start to look at what would that process and timeline look like and what's reasonable to do well, because to rush it may or may not be the right piece.
I'm not suggesting what we should or shouldn't do. I'm just suggesting that since it isn't the first time I've heard about it, that if there are resources you need from us
Yes.
to help you
Yeah.
run this problem,
Yep.
with concern,
Yeah.
I'm sure with very challenged, that, we'd love to hear about, because I know it has been on the list.
Thank you.
So I'm between you and sleep. So I'm not going to ask you to respond to this first one, but I'll just say, so first of all, I want to say, congratulations on the celebrations and the games. It's good to hear and good to see, and I appreciate the efforts that you all have been doing on that. I also appreciate your explicit and focus on high needs students. That said, I still am concerned that students with disabilities in particular are way down there at 20 and 30%, between a 40 and 60% gap. At least on that rate, that's where you can see that distinction. So pretty big gap still. So I hope that you're looking at iReady data from that lens as well. I know it doesn't automatically break down by that. That's something you have to do kind of manually. Yeah, but I hope you're doing that and thinking about what it means for those students in terms of both classroom experience with the supports that they're due and or interventions. We really need to make some progress with those students, in my opinion. The question that I would like to hear your comments on. These are all metrics that are important to track and watch and kind of form a sense of how we're doing kind of baseline relative to standard and whatnot. But you've all made and we've made comments that, they are not necessarily the metrics that we want to celebrate and, say this is what makes us excellent. What metrics would you like to add to this presentation in the future that would expand beyond kind of foundation here to say we have a well-rounded student and here's how we know it?
Well, you're thinking, can I ask Allison to comment on special ed concerns? Allison, would you have some comments on the special ed observation?
I'd like to comment on that. And I actually, with what you just said, you kind of hit the nail on the head, Pam. So we list the score results, we identify them as students with disabilities. And in reality, these are numbers for students in special education. So the reason students are receiving services through special education, the reason they qualify for special education is because students need remediation and they have scores that are below grade level. So that is why they're identified for special education. So we also have students with disabilities who receive remediation through special education, they exit, and then they remain students with disabilities, but they are now performing at grade level. So when students with disabilities or students in special education perform at grade level, that's typically the time when they're exiting special education. So for that reason, the results for students with disabilities, which is solely students in special education, the reason there is a gap is because those students are in special education receiving a lot of services so they can close the gap. So, but then when they do, they're not showing up in those numbers anymore. So that to me is why you're seeing some lower results for those students. It's not necessarily a permanent situation for them. The other thing that I found really interesting looking at these results for students in special education specifically is that there were some scores that were very uneven at the high school level in particular. And when you look at the scores early on, these are students, they've recently been picked up for special education. They're getting additional services. We're working to close that gap. So many of them who have more moderate disabilities, such as health or learning disabilities, they're at some point going to exit special education, which was also a chart that Heather showed, where our special education, if you organize by age, it looks like a mountain because you have students identified and it peaks at age 12 or 13, and then the numbers go down because they're exiting. So it's really important to look at this as a fluid population that is joining us often in elementary school, numbers peaking in middle school, and then students they're closing the gap and they're exiting. And of course, we also have this more a higher need population within special education that will continue to be in special education long term. But interestingly, so you kind of expect to see this gap at the elementary when we're just picking kids up. And then when you get to high school, at times we had some spikes in our performance, and that was because we had a lower need cohort at the high school, whereas there was one score area that looked very low, and that was a, a group, a particular grade level at the high school who didn't score well in the biology, but when I dissected that information, those were predominantly students who had neurological disabilities and intellectual impairments, and it just at that grade level was a higher need cohort. So it really takes a lot of dissection, because when you get to the high school, you're usually looking at cohorts in these results of 10, 11 students sometimes. So they're very low numbers, and it can fluctuate really widely based on the needs of the students. But my message is that students they're picked up in special education, they're closing the gap, and then they're exiting. So there's not typically a point where you're going to see special education students outperforming or performing the same as their general education peers, because by the time that happens, they're not necessarily designated as special education anymore.
So thank you for that, Allison. I'd love to have a conversation with you about that, because that is not my understanding of how special education is supposed to identify students, like being below grade level as the primary criteria. And again, I don't, this is have that conversation, but
it's
if
not
maybe I heard you wrong.
So Jake, they are identified with a disability and they're not making effective progress. So it's those two factors. So there are students who don't have disabilities and they're receiving services through MTSS. But there are also, but we wouldn't identify somebody just because they had a disability. They also have to have lower performance in combination with the disability. And yes, I'd be happy to talk to you in more detail about it.
All right, thank you.
Thanks.
Good question.
Yeah.
Additional metrics.
It might be a great idea to start talking about an exit survey for our seniors, or having the vision of the graduate be the portfolio that we've talked about, and having that be something that we can use as a data point as well. And speaking again, as they're leaving, and not giving them a survey after a test their sophomore year, you're giving them a survey at the end of senior year, and maybe working that in and using that as a data point would be something I might be interested in.
I'd be interested in a portfolio as well, where a student self-selects a handful of pieces of work that they've done from year to year, and self-selects and self-assesses and articulates why they chose the pieces, why, what growth they've seen and what they think it's attributed to that growth, and generally demonstrates a readiness for what's to come each successive year. And you can see, middle school MCAS numbers versus high school numbers, they get there, right? They get there. So they get to a lot of great places that we're not necessarily focusing on and measuring. And so I think this is a great conversation. It could be, I'd love to really sit down and think about it and give you a comprehensive list of the areas that I would love to measure, really pay attention to, driven by the kids.
Yeah, I think I agree with the portfolio piece and just having a demonstration of learning year after year after year. I think if you think back to that I'll call it the food pyramid that Heather showed, like that bottom piece, that formative assessment piece, that part that drives the learning every day is so dynamic. And because teaching and learning is dynamic, so just looking at how the teachers are taking that information over to guide their instruction and what impact that's having on the students. Like, I don't know how to capture that in some data metric way, but I think that's the piece that's really important.
I was just thinking, so if you look at the package that we have vocal, which is kind of, qualitative, I guess, that's quantified, right? So it's how you feel. So that's important. We've got MCAS, which is, summative data, so it's at the end, at that point, like, that data shows us kind of where we got to, but at that point, we can't really do anything different because we're at the end. And then we have iReady, which is our formative. And so we have a nice quantitative package. If I was like in charge of the world and I could do whatever I wanted, I would take those things and I would make homegrown versions of them, because there are flaws and faults in all of those, because they're designed for the state as a whole. And so, like, to some of the questions we're talking about, like local data, like maybe words and stuff, like maybe we wouldn't give them after they just took the gas assessment, that sort of thing. And the thing I would add, in addition to the portfolio assessment or performance assessment, that sort of thing, would be maybe a parent survey, maybe a recent senior high school exit survey, maybe it's a parent survey at the end. I just think about all of the kind of positive feedback that we hear from parents, even at things like, the STEM night and, day in and day out. So be able to kind of capture that, how was your child's experience at elementary school, were they prepared for middle school, and then so on and so forth. But I can charge so.
And I just had a couple of short things. Thank you all again for everything. My first question, I think I remember the answer to this, but like comparing us or our district to the state, I don't know, it doesn't seem overly valuable to me. But remind me, there is no other number. We only have a state number, right? There's no like life cohorts and districts.
So if you want to play in the data sandbox, if you go down to the append, when this is posted,
Right, so, yeah.
anyone in the community can, there's something called Dart Schools. So DART is, I'm just gonna.
I can look at it then. It's okay, yeah.
But just for anyone at home who's curious as well, within each of the schools, the state pulls and identifies similar schools that have similar demographics, whether it's size or it's special populations. And then they can share, and that's MCAS only, but they can share comparisons across. And additionally, in the high school data set, you will find that I pulled out the Cape Ann
Okay.
as well.
Yeah.
But
So the simple
collectively,
answer is like on the main presentation, if you want to put like 3, you know, like the Dart state, that would be really beneficial for me. And then the only other thing, I've already heard some great feedback on, you know, John, you mentioned the homework club and how that's shifting at Memorial. Is there anything like that at Essex? And if not, it seems like a great idea. You don't even have to answer. And then I'm also wondering if there's anything at the middle school level too. Okay, but also not a homework club though, and how it's shifting at Memorial. So there was one specific, you know, like study skills and organizational strategies, you know, and being kind of more specific with that. So it's not just, like you mentioned, John, kids kind of going to do homework. It's actually a bit of, you know, maybe addressing some of the gaps that you guys have identified. That seems like if there is already stipend money there to do that, and that seems like a great area to maybe take advantage. That was just a quick observation that I made. But again, you guys know best, so that's all I have. Yeah.
Just to add on one more thing that, Jason, you're asking about what other benchmarking data we see. And personally, there's one page about 2024 class SAT scores and the number of the graduates and where to go. I find it very interesting. I wonder if we can provide the data trends. How are our kids' SAT scores, shift, and how, what kind of college do they go to, like percentage wise, over the years? It would be interesting to see that. The street profile in there, but. Yeah.
All right, well, thank you very much, especially in the interest of time. Really appreciate it.
thank you.
Yeah. So I know that we're already at time as well, but definitely want to get to,
Budget to actual.
yeah, the budget to actuals, right? And if we have a little bit of time, especially, well, the two next parts, right? Budget to actuals, and then we could a quick, very short discussion on budget planning. But then I'm going to suggest that we table any ongoing one.
Sounds good. I thought that we finished, did we not finish the goals? What was lingering on the goals?
Yes. Well, either way, I suggest we table that discussion at all
Sorry.
next time.
Sounds good. All right, so budget to actions.
Yep.
Okay. I will make this as brief as possible. As Anna mentioned, we did review this at the finance subcommittee meeting earlier today. This is our first quarterly report for FY '25. It is a work in progress. As you'll notice, it's a little bit different from last year, and it will continue to be improved as I receive feedback and requests and what you want to see. But as of September 30th, we had spent 5.5 million or 18.3% of our operating budget. While we were at 25% throughout the year, our school year obviously does not start July 1, starts a little bit later, a couple months later. So it actually skews our percentages. So that's why we're not seeing, close to a 25% expenditure rate at this point. This point last year, we had actually spent 17.3%. So we're exactly 1 point off from where we were at this period last year. But overall, we're in good order. We were able to prepay a portion of our out-of-district tuitions at the end of last year to the tune of $200,000. So that gives us a little bit of cushion. We do that each year, which helps us with our unanticipated special education costs, if there are any. And if there aren't, then we prepay at the end of next year as well. So the report does break it down by line and certain categories. It's unfortunately a manual roll up. It's not something I can press a button and get out. It's a roll up with some adjustments that we have to take certain figures out, add certain figures in. So it's certainly not an easy process to come up with this format. But I think it's the cleanest format, and it actually aligns with how we present our budget. So in the personnel side of things, we have 13.7% spent at this point. And as I mentioned, 12-month expenses, we are 25% of the way through. However, we have a lot of 10-month employees, so we don't start paying them till the beginning of September. So therefore, it skews our percentages. Typically, our school year employees are paid between 10 and 12% in the year as of this point. So that's why you're seeing an average of 13% spent overall. Our operating costs for expenses, we had paid 25.7%, closer to the quarter of the year. And as I mentioned, our overall spending rate is 18.3%. A couple of lines I just want to point out, our district admin operating expenses, we had spent 38% of that. So a lot of our costs are upfront or once a year. So it's not out of the ordinary. Transportation, as Pam mentioned, we have not, as of September 30th, we had not paid a single dollar to our company. We had been billed in October, so we have since made our first payments, but that's a cost that usually lags. But we are still in discussions about how to get some financial compensation for the difficulties we're receiving or experiencing rather. And athletics and student activities in that particular line, that's only a portion of what our athletic budget is, but a good portion of that actually falls into the revolving fund. So we had spent 52% of that budget so far this year. The other page, which is new this year in your quarterly report, is actually a cash summary report. It just basically rolls up all of the cash that we have on hand. At the beginning of the year, we started the year with $11.7 million. And it will show you how we broke it down into July, August, and September, our beginning balance, our monthly activity, and our ending balance. We broke it down into operational funds, which is basically all of our operating bank accounts. And then we have our OPEB funds, and we have our student activity funds that are managed by our principals. So the total is the bottom, the fourth section down on that page. And we ended our quarter with just over $11 million. So it spent a little bit down, and the cash balance will typically fluctuate throughout each month, throughout the year. Certain points in the year, we have larger cash expenditures. We have debt payments twice a year. So we have one in July, another one in January. So you'll see larger expenditures in those months. And just the bottom half of this page really breaks down our income, the big buckets of where you see your income coming from the Commonwealth of Mass for most of our state aid. Our assessments from Manchester for operating and capital, Essex for operating and capital, our interest earnings, and then other, which was preschool tuition, out of district payments from other districts, athletic and lunch fees. And then the very bottom just says our expenses paid, whether it's through the AP vouchers that you guys approve each meeting, our payroll, which Chris approves each payroll, or our debt payments, which are also on our AP vouchers. So basically that sums it up. This quarter, the net activity was down $111,000. So we're operating pretty flush. Yeah. I also do want to mention that a lot of that $11 million is earmarked for certain things. For example, of that $11 million, $1.5 million is our stabilization fund balance. So we really can't use that for operating. It's in our cash, but we can't use it for operating costs without a school committee vote. And a lot of that is earmarked funds, either in our school lunch account or grant accounts or other things. So there are a lot of restrictions within that cash. It's not like free cash that we can use anywhere for any purpose, but it is a view of our overall cash position.
On a quarterly basis, like this, by the way, this is super helpful. Great report on the cash and also great report on the quarterly the budget action report. I wonder going forward, can you also add a very quick year to date the end balance of the different reserve budget balance?
Yes, that's
Yeah.
It's planned. I'm not sure I'll get there in the second quarter. I'm hoping to, but yes, that is my plan by the end of the year. Absolutely, you'll have those.
Any questions?
All right, thank you, Michelle. So do we want, so the next item on the agenda, I think it was
Budget planning.
budget planning, yeah.
It's really just a quick note to say we're in process, principals are in the process of building their budgets right now. They'll come into Michelle week of the 18th. Yes. And we'll have
November
it-
18th.
November 18th. And we'll have a draft tentative budget out just before the Thanksgiving break, because our meeting's on that Tuesday we get back.
Mhm.
Thinking ahead to next meeting, would love to hear from the committee a little bit on kind of the charge. What you're looking for. So what we know at this point is that healthcare is going to be a bit of a wild card. It's starting off very high. We are working on coming up with an actual meet personnel increase for next year based on our contracts. Currently they're going line for line, so won't be, won't be a guess, the assumption will be accurate. At this point, I'm assuming somewhere in the 4% area, based on how we've settled contracts out. We know that special ed out of district tuition, so those 20 student tuitions, there's a statewide cap in the mid threes, right? Before cost for adjustment. So we know some variables already. What I'll be interested in hearing from you is, do you want budget scenarios? We've had some discussion about how to account for some of the personnel asks. Although we don't know yet what the principals are going to ask for. There hasn't been a large discussion about need to this point. We have no early identified things that we're looking for that are large scale to date. So I don't anticipate any curveballs out of the budget process, but from you guys, what are you looking for? Do you want 3 different scenarios? Do you want kind of a pie in the sky, the level funded kind of, so how do you want us to build? And then I think a big question that I'll be looking for some direction on is we've settled out now the 2 collective bargaining contracts, which account for the overwhelming majority of our staff. We know that over the years, they've been growing at a rate of about 4%. We have a couple of classifications of employees who have been held flat at 2.5 for the inflationary years. How would you like us to address that in the upcoming budget? We want us to account for some inflationary growth. Is this the year that we make an adjustment for those groups? So something to think about in preparation. I'm not asking for feedback tonight, but something for you to think about planning for next.
Yeah, I can add some additional color to that. So our employees that aren't under contract, I think everyone understands how compound growth works when you're at 2.5% and the rest of the staff is, at 4%, and how that can quickly get out of hand. So, if anyone needs additional information about that, you can definitely reach out to Pam or Rochelle, but just what I understand about it so far is that it's, I think we've discussed it the past 2 years and essentially said no. What I can see some issues arising from that, and we can bring those up at a later date, but I think it's something that we need to, as a committee, seriously consider.
Pam, do you mind emailing us what you just summarized, basically?
Happy to. And I think we can chart out a little bit, like teacher have moved at 4% for 4 years, TAs for 2 years, and then everyone else was. So you can just see the gap that's growing.
I can bring up a really quick one because it seems to come up every single year. Is there any movement on K-6 foreign language? And is that something that we could expect to see numbers on, or is that still a bit off?
And to answer it very directly, we could achieve alignment of the schedules at the middle high school. We have staff at no cost to run.
To run K-6?
I'm sorry, 6 to 12. We can run it, no. K five would be an
Yes.
additional person, sorry, I misunderstood. 6 to 12, we keep, an alignment gets us there, sorry, thank you, Erica. K five, we need a realignment of the entire day to make time in the schedule to re-enter it. So I think that's a slightly bigger project.
Okay.
I think you'll see that in our documents as something we are looking to do for 27.
All right. Any questions on that?
So that's just kind
Anything else
of,
from Pam? Yeah, any?
I'll follow up on kind of the thought questions and yeah, that will help us on how to frame it.
Yeah. Does that work for everyone to kind of, think about that topic for our next meeting?
Sure.
All right, perfect. So with that, I'm going to move right to school committee comment, and if there is any. All right, then I'll accept a motion to adjourn.
So much.
Second. All right, all those in favor? Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah.